gates and brought the scab car to a virtual stop. As they attempted to convince him not to cross through, mounted police viciously charged and attacked the strikers. Police continued to shoot tear gas guns from behind plant gates. Soon, there were more than 5,000 picketers fighting with police as workers poured out from half a dozen nearby plants to support the strikers. For over 2 hours, workers showered strike-breaking forces with bricks, rocks, and paving blocks. They overturned scab cars and drove the police off the street and into the plant. Fighting broke out again in the afternoon when police tried to bring in more tear gas supplies. Strike leaders directed activities from an amplifier on the roof of a nearby restaurant. The next day, famed Prohibition crusader Elliot Ness, now Cleveland's director of public safety, enforced a 500-yard riot zone, banning all gatherings near the gates and limited picketers to 7 at each gate. Strikers began picketing the homes of known scabs and would ratify a new contract just days later. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com. You are listening to the best of The Rick Smith Show. If you have any thoughts, any questions, any comments, we'd love to hear it. You can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. Thanks for tuning in. And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is The Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here. You know, on Monday, February 26th, the U.S. Supreme Court is scheduled to hear arguments in the Mark Janus versus the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees Council 31. The case potentially could be the biggest hit to organized labor since Ronald Reagan fired the PATCO air traffic controllers back in 1981. It's my view that this case, brought forth by funding from anti-union groups like the National Right to Work Legal Defense Fund and the euphemistically named Fairness Center, is about nothing more than Machiavellian politics and a massive, massive power grab by the wealth class of this country. You know, the corporatist right, they have been pushing this right-to-work nonsense for a very long time. And what these, and I hate using that frame, right to work, because there are no rights and there's certainly no work. What these are about, simply, it's about wresting power away from workers and returning it to the days of, well, the robber barons. Undoing the entire 20th century and returning us to the good old days of the 80s and 90s, the 1880s and 90s. And this is basically what the Janus case is about. You can get into all the legal semantics, and we will, but this case is about, well, power. It's about control. It's about silencing the voice of working people to demand better wages, hours, conditions. It's about the end of the middle class. It's also about usurping the legislative process and using the courts to impose a national right-to-work law on all public sector workers from coast to coast without one public hearing, without one vote, without comments from we the people, without any of that. And for my conservative friends, this should anger you. The fact that an activist court justice called for this legislation from the bench, it should enrage you. The idea of using government as a bludgeon to ram through what cannot pass legislative muster should make your blood boil. And as I said, ultimately, this case is about power and money. You remember back when, during the Obama term, when the U.S. auto industry was actually in free fall, and it was about to collapse, and all the right-wingers were saying, we should let them fail and, do away with it, and because they really wanted to hurt those unionized workers. There was a guy named Zach Wamp. He was a congressman from Tennessee at the time, and he was one of those loud voices advocating to let them fail, and that with the failure, all those jobs would go with it. And it was one of those moments where I watched him speak, and it was either he was unwittingly not knowing what he was saying or brazenly stating that Volkswagen had just invested in Tennessee. And the exact quote was, Volkswagen invested in Tennessee, a right-to-work state at a low cost with less health care. We shouldn't we should not prop others up. And I remember thinking at the time, there it is. The goal of the Republican Party, the goal of the Republican-backed right to work, right there, simplified for everyone to hear, for everyone to understand. It's about less wages, it's about fewer benefits, and it's about more power for corporate interests. Simple. It doesn't get any simpler than that. And when you look at this, you go, this is another one of those moments in history where you have to ask, which side are you on? And understand that the labor movement has seen, unlimited amounts of these moments where you have to make this choice. Are you on the side of capital or are you on the side of labor? Because look, the eternal push-pull between capital and labor is never ending. The want for more on either side is never ending. And what unions have done really well since their inception is to give workers a voice on the job and a seat on the table to decide, well, how the fruits of their labor are divided. How much does labor get? How much does capital get? So when I hear an argument for the Janus case that, Rick, it's not about any of that. We're perfectly in favor of labor unions and perfectly in favor of people collectively bargaining. This is about freedom, Rick. It's about personal freedom. I have to ask, is someone who's pitching that nonsensical argument at me deluded, complicit, or just plain stupid? Because at the end of this, the only freedom that you're going to gain, the only freedom that you will have to say, well, I got the freedom, is the freedom to work for less. Lower wages, less health benefits, less opportunity, less safe working conditions. And to me, this takes me back to something my grandfather always said. He said, if a rich guy is going to take a buck out of his pocket to tell you you don't need something, you better spend two to get it. I look at the amount of money, the amount of resource that has gone into this, 50, 60-year attack on organized labor. And I guess you have to, honestly and truthfully, be in awe at the wealth class's commitment to destroying organized labor. I mean, you really have to. Because case after case, year after year, they continually fund these attack dogs. And they continue to push the death of 1,000 paper cuts for a prosperous working class. And somehow, masterfully, to their credit, and you have to give them credit, they have convinced working people that somehow their unions are bad. They have done a masterful job of divorcing workers from their unions. Honestly and truthfully, they've done a masterful job of divorcing citizens from their government. But when you look at this, it's always these very interesting arguments. For instance, there are two main arguments in this. The first being that any public sector worker who engages in collective bargaining is basically a lobbyist. So lobbying government is not allowed. So therefore, it shouldn't even happen. We shouldn't even have public sector unions because on its face, you're lobbying government, which is kind of ridiculous. At the end of the day, a working person is a working person, and in my view, should have the right to organize and collectively bargain. The other argument is that fair share or agency fees are a form of compelled speech. That by making you pay a fair share, making you pay an agency fee is making you agree with everything that the union does, and therefore, it should be constitutionally done away with. Again, this is another one of those ridiculous arguments. Because I go and I look at this, and you don't have to join a union in today's law. You don't. You have to pay for the representation that gets you wages, hours, conditions. And I've never heard anyone really complain that they are doing well. This is one of those moments, at least in my view, when maybe the unions have done too good of a job. Maybe they've done too well. Because, and reading through some of the amicus briefs, and they're very comical, some of them. You had one with 4 public school teachers who were angry that their union sought higher wages and benefits. Okay. That's the reason we need to destroy the unions, because they were actually trying to make your life better. There were two public school teachers who were angry that they can't take their fair share money and give it to political organizations. Because there's a rule that says, okay, if you have a religious objection, if you are truly a religious objector, you can take your fair share money and give it to a nonprofit. Give it to Big Brothers, Big Sisters, give it to, some charity that does charitable work, the United Way, whatever. Well, they want to give it to political organizations to attack the unions, which is insane to me. Another one of my favorites, two Illinois attorneys generals. They're arguing that the unions are the cause of the crisis in Illinois with their budget. Therefore, they should be done away with. And you stop and you think of some of these arguments that the right keeps throwing out. It's all about more for the handful and less for everybody else, especially workers. Because understand, right now, while union density in this country is about 10.7%, in the public sector, it's almost a third. And it's where I would argue if we had the kind of laws that we had back in the 1950s and 60s, the natural rate of unionization is about a third. It's about what it is in Canada. Without all of the right-wing attacks, without all the corporate influence, without all of the attacks, I truly believe that's what it would be. Now, this case on the 26th, I think everyone universally believes this Supreme Court, this activist court, is already decided that the Janus case will be the law of the land. The question is how does labor respond? The question is how do we, the working people of this country, respond? Because I'm saying, look, we're at another one of those moments. This is just like August of 1981. How will we respond? I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Is this the right thing to do? Is Janus in the right direction? Or is it really just about defunding and destroying labor unions and the workers' ability to collectively bargain for better wages, hours, and conditions? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Rick@thericksmithshow.com. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to pick this up on the other side with Howard Bunnis. Stick around. Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. So Monday, February 26th is the big day. What we're going to see is the U.S. Supreme Court is going to hear the Janus versus AFSCME case, along with, well, all of the other anti-worker cases that have popped up thanks to, well, the national right to work folks. What this is going to do, and I've said this for months and, well, for years now, this is all about, one, gutting the labor movement, gutting the Democratic Party, but also clawing back generations of hard-fought wage increases, hard-fought benefits, and working conditions. I'm here to talk a little bit about what this case is, what it means, and, well, the potential damage it will do. I've asked Howard Buncis to come talk with us. He's the past chair of the American Association of University Professors National Union, AAUP. Howard, thanks for taking time for us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So this case is almost a mirror image of the Friedrichs case before it. Why is this so important to the labor movement?
This case is so important to the labor movement because it takes away our voice. It's trying to take away our voice as workers. When you say that people who are not members of the union don't have to pay union dues, what you're doing is saying the union has no voice in what happens in the workplace. And these cases, Friedrichs, Janus, and all the other cases before it, are about one thing and one thing only: taking unions out. The people who are opposed to us, they believe that unions are the problem. We believe unions are the solution, however. And this case is just, we can get into the specifics of the case, but it's really about taking away workers' voice. And all we've ever wanted, and all union people ever want, is a seat at the table and a voice in the process. And what Janus is about is not letting us have that seat and not letting us have that voice. And that's all it is. That's what it's always been about. It's always been about not letting us in because of the belief that somehow if you let workers have a seat at the table, if you let workers have a voice in the process, that somehow that's not good. We believe the exact opposite. We believe in every workplace, whether it be in higher education, whether it be in K-12, whether it be in the public sector, whether it be in the private sector, we're all better off when we work together. We're all better off with our collective voice. And that's what we're fighting for. That's what this case is really about. The specifics of it, yes, they matter. And I'm a lawyer myself, and we could talk about all the legal arguments, which we're very well versed in. But what matters is voice. That's what this is about. This is all about union workers having a voice and keeping their voice. Because when we have that voice, not only do we make the workplace better, we make everybody better. We make all of us better. When unions are strong, everyone is stronger.
No, I absolutely agree. But what do you say to the other side of this who says, Howard, it's about freedom. It's about liberty. It's about my not having to participate in an organization that I don't agree with.
It's not about your freedom. It's about all of our freedom. When we work together, when you're a member of a union and that union has the right to negotiate wages, benefits, and working conditions, we're arguing for everyone in that workforce. And the idea that, I shouldn't be forced. No one is forcing anybody. We're working for you. We're working for everybody. And that's what this is about. We are about trying to make sure that everyone in that labor force, everyone in that workforce, whether it be on a campus like mine, whether it be in any public sector, whether it be a K-12 school, whether it be the police, whether it be fire, whoever it is, we want to make sure that we are working together to make it a better place. And the idea that somehow if I don't agree with everything that the union says, therefore I should not have to join or not have to pay, all that does is weaken our collective voice. And with that voice, standing together, again, we're going to make it a better place. We're going to make Eastern Michigan University, where I teach, a better university if the union at Eastern Michigan University has everyone together bargaining for what's better for the university and better for our workers.
But what do you say to the person who says, look, that's all great. Go ahead and do it. I don't want to be part of it.
If that's the case, if we do that, if we allow people not to pay if they're not members, all that's going to do is weaken the union's right to bargain collectively, a right that we've won and fought so long for, and really does make a difference. And
I agree.
If you say, look, I don't want to pay, you go ahead. Go ahead. I believe in all your stuff. You guys go ahead and do it. Knock yourselves out. Well, we will knock ourselves out. But we need this collective voice. We need everybody working together. Think about it. In any workplace, especially in education, we're always better off if we're together, if we're all working together. This idea, it's taken hold in our society. I'm sorry to be political, but it really is a philosophy of the Republican Party. I don't mean to get that political.
No, get political. The reality is you're absolutely right. It's my view that this isn't about the individual right of anyone. This is about a political ideology of gutting the ability of workers to fight for those better wages, hours, and conditions, and to have a voice. This is purely Machiavellian politics.
It's the idea that, we believe in public education, that public education is a public good, no matter what level it's at, whether it's K-12 level, community college level, or four-year college. We believe it's a public good. The other side believes you want an education, you pay for it. They're not only trying to gut public higher education, they're trying to privatize K-12 education. And don't think that doesn't exist. Don't think that's not part of this. It is. And it filters through in all areas of society. Think about the debate we've had over healthcare. Think about what health insurance is. Health insurance, we're all part of a pool. And Rick, if you get sick this year, well, that's not good. But obviously, if you're part of a pool, hopefully it won't bankrupt you to take care of yourself, because maybe in the next 5 years, you'll be healthy. That's what insurance is about. Yep. But what the Republicans want, what they believe in, if you're sick, you pay for it. You want an education, you pay for it. They do not believe in collectiveness. We firmly believe that this society, this truly American society is better off if we're together. If we pool our resources, if we act together, and if we work together, we're going to make everybody better off. And this idea that somehow we're all these individuals, we're all individualistic on our own, and that's the only way this country got formed on its own. This country got formed by people working together. And that's what we need to continue to fight for.
I absolutely agree with you, and you're spot on when you look at the two sides of this. The one side I think we're both on is we are better when we're all together, and we are better when we're working collectively. Whereas on the other side, you have the Ayn Rand view, the libertarian view, which is why there are so many libertarian think tanks who have chimed in on this case. And, a big part of it is not just, in their view, it's not just about tearing unions down. It's about tearing society down. It's about tearing our government down as well.
Yeah. This idea that somehow we're all these rogue act, we're all individualistic. We're all going to be on our own. We'll do everything on our own. We don't need anybody else. We just need ourselves. It's just, it goes against everything that this country is really formed on. And it really is not the way people are going to benefit. I mean, people are aching for togetherness. They're aching for being connected and part of something. And that's really a union. You've been a union member, you said, for your whole working life. And I have for most of my working life. You're part of something greater than your own self-interest. And the idea that somehow I don't believe in the union, therefore I'm not going to pay. What exactly don't you believe in? Do you not believe in us working together so we get better wages and benefits for everyone? Do you not believe in a fair process for everyone? Do you not believe that we can make an education that's better for all the students everywhere in our organization? Do you not believe in those things? Of course you believe in those things. So let's not let people just opt out if they want and just weaken the union to the extent they can. This is not about freedom. I mean, I'm sorry to be so blunt, but this has nothing to do with individual freedom. This is simply to weaken unions. It's that simple. It's that crass, and I hate to be that crass. That is the motivation behind this. And when I look at our organization, the AUP, we did an amicus brief to the Supreme Court in the Janus case with the National Education Association, with the NEA. And in that brief, there are certain passages and certain quotes from people on the other side where it's obvious and stated right there in black and white. What they want is the end of unions. That's what they really believe, that if we could just get rid of all the unions, everything would be okay. It's kind of like the same way with if we could just get rid of teachers, schools would be fine. If we didn't have any teachers, everything would be great. We could just plug everything in. Everyone could just take a class that's online, and we wouldn't need any teachers anymore.
Well, of course, and to me, the question becomes is, what's labor's reaction going to be to this? And I've been asking this question on our daily radio program for a while. Are we at a moment in history where, we have to say, look, the end of labor peace is upon us. It's time for a much more militant union and a much more militant reaction.
I couldn't agree more. We have to stand up. We have to stand up. If we just say, oh, it's a Supreme Court decision, we'll just follow whatever the Supreme Court says, that's not acceptable. Every union, local, national, needs to stand together. And this is a time, labor has a history of different groups moving in different directions. I'll say this. I've been in labor. I've been involved in national labor politics for a while. I've never seen the different unions get together stronger and more united than on this issue right now. We are. Because
don't they have to realize that this is a stab in the back? This is another death of 1,000 paper cuts. I mean, this is serious.
There's a punch in the stomach, and this is hitting us right in the stomach. And we need to stand together. This is it. This is our time. And people are realizing around the country, as bad as November of 2016 was, if we had won in November 2016, I'm not so sure we'd be mobilized the way we are now. Obviously, if we had won if we won the White House in November 16, there would be a different Supreme Court makeup, and we wouldn't be having this case. But don't rest assured that there is still the anti-union movement, and people who don't believe in worker voice is not going to go away, no matter who's in charge.
Right.
No matter who is in charge in the White House, no matter where the Congress lays, Senate and House, obviously not in our favor now. Things change. In 2009 to 2017, there've been a switch of over 1,000 state legislators from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party. Those things can turn back. You know they can. But the only way they're going to turn is by union people and others and civil rights people getting together. And that's what you're going to see. That's what we're going to see this Saturday in Detroit.
Well, that's the hope. Look, at the end of this, it was, in my view, it was union members who gave us Donald Trump, and it's going to be union members who are going to help turn this country around. And look, I as a union member myself, I have no idea why someone would vote for this guy, especially given the fact that, you have a Neil Gorsuch in the stolen Supreme Court seat. But I think you're right. I think we have the ability to turn this back around.
Here in Michigan, in the state I live in now, Donald Trump got over 1/3 of the union vote in the state of Michigan, and by some estimates, close to 40% of the union vote. Very similar in your home state of Ohio and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, states here in the Midwest, which obviously shifted the election. My view is, okay, we know this happened. I don't think now's, it's awful, isn't it awful? No, let's put that behind us. Yes, we lost that election. Yes, a lot of union people voted for Donald Trump, voted against their self-interest. Now we're going to show people that by working together, unions really can make a difference. We can make a difference in people's lives. We can make every workplace a better place. And we're going to stand up. And I really believe our time is now. I really believe, I'm an optimist, and I believe that this moment, this week, and going forward, we could really make a difference. And I think we're going to. I think you're going to see between Saturday and Monday activism at a level from unions that you have not seen in a very long time.
Well, and the hope is that it continues on to Tuesday and Wednesday and down the road, because look, I'm sure that the right wing is have your little parade, have your little rally. At the end of the day, they're going to start continuing this assault, because Janus isn't the end of this, as I'm sure you know. There's a whole organizing campaign that's coming after Janus that's going to try and unorganize the already organized and to get them to sign cards to drop out, and all kinds of stuff is coming, along with more court cases that are making their way through the pipeline to continue to chip away at the ability of workers to collectively bargain for better wages, hours, and conditions.
I can tell you that's going to happen. I can tell you how we're fighting that. At the AUP and every union nationally and locally, we are engaging with our members in a way. We're making believe we have 98% membership in my union at Eastern Michigan. 98% of our people are members of the union. We're not, however, we're treating this moment, Janus, as an opportunity to recommit our membership. We are going to have all those, we're going to organize as if we didn't have a union to begin with. We are going to take this as an organizing opportunity. No matter how strong your union is, and our union is very strong. And remember, Michigan is already right to work. Michigan's already a right to work state. So we at our union, we've been able to deal with, Michigan became right to work in 2013, as I'm sure you're aware, which is nothing we're happy about. But we know how to face it. And the way to face it is to have conversations with our members. But just because we've had those conversations, we've kept our union strong. And many of our unions here in Michigan have kept strong.
What do you say to the person, Howard, who goes, that's great, you're doing a bunch of organizing. You're organizing the organized, which means they've won because you're spending all of your resources continuing to organize the already organized, which means you're not going out and organizing new people.
Oh, we're doing that. I promise you we're doing that as well. We have, at our union, AUP, we have several campaigns around the country that are happening as we speak. Some we're doing jointly with our partners, the American Federation of Teachers. Some we're doing on our own. We are not going to stop organizing. I give you this. There has been some diversion of attention, more internal. In the 8 years I was chair, we organized quite a bit of new unions that we were able to accomplish, that maybe in this environment we're putting a lot of resources into fighting Janus. However, I don't really view it as this or that. I think this really is waking us up to some level. And we're having these organizing conversations with our existing members, but that's sometimes a good thing. Maybe we got too complacent, even without our strong unions. And this is a way to re-energize those. So I'm completely energized. I know that we're going to have those organizing conversations internally at our unions, and we are going to continue to organize. And by the way, in January of 2018, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, they come out with the percentage of people that are unionized, workers that are unionized in this country. In general, it's depressing news, right? only 10.7% of the workers in this country are unionized.
Right.
However, for whatever it's worth, it was a slight uptick from 2016 to 2017. So with several states, including Michigan, Kentucky, Indiana, recently going right to work, we've been able to not grow largely, but still fend off that decline. Remember, union membership back when in the 50s, more than 1/3 of workers were unionized. Now we're down, of all workers, now we're at 10%, 10.7%. And so even with that, even with everything going on and with the attack, with the Republicans controlling all three levels of power in Washington, we've been able to have a little uptick in union membership, and we're not going to stop. We're going to continue to fight. We're going to continue to organize. I can tell you this from myself and many of our other leaders. This woe is me, isn't it horrible? Aren't they bad? Yeah, they are bad, and it is tough. But the way to address it is not to say, oh, aren't they just awful? No, the way to address it is to stand up, fight, and organize, which is what we're doing.
Absolutely. Howard, great stuff. I look forward to talking to you again down the road as this continues. Thanks so much for your time.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Rick, keep up the good fight. We love what you're doing.
Good stuff. Thanks so much, Howard. And look, I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Is this just about power and greed, or is this about freedom and liberty? Share your thoughts, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back.
Brought to you by the Amalgamated Transit Union, the largest labor organization representing 200,000 transit workers in the United States and Canada. The ATU works to promote transit issues and fights for the interests of its hardworking members and riders.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1939. That was the day striking auto workers in Cleveland, Ohio, defended their picket lines in what is known as the Battle of East 140th Street. Members of UAW Local 45 at GM's Fisher Body Plant had been on strike for 3 weeks. They had joined striking GM workers at 12 plants throughout Michigan. They demanded a supplemental agreement granting skilled workers wage increases, overtime adjustments and seniority, and apprentice provisions. In Cleveland, strikers vowed to stop the scabbing and were mostly successful. Now, at the start of the morning shift, a scab attempted to plow through the picket lines at a high rate of speed. Strikers flooded the gates and brought the scab car to a virtual stop. As they attempted to convince him not to cross through, mounted police viciously charged and attacked the strikers. Police continued to shoot tear gas guns from behind plant gates. Soon, there were more than 5,000 picketers fighting with police as workers poured out from half a dozen nearby plants to support the strikers. For over 2 hours, workers showered strike-breaking forces with bricks, rocks, and paving blocks. They overturned scab cars and drove the police off the street and into the plant. Fighting broke out again in the afternoon when police tried to bring in more tear gas supplies. Strike leaders directed activities from an amplifier on the roof of a nearby restaurant. The next day, famed Prohibition crusader Eliot Ness, now Cleveland's director of public safety, enforced a 500-yard riot zone, banning all gatherings near the gates and limited picketers to 7 at each gate. Strikers began picketing the homes of known scabs and would ratify a new contract just days later. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com. You are listening to the best of The Rick Smith Show. If you have any thoughts, any questions, any comments, we'd love to hear it. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks for tuning in.
China is dumping steel all over the United States, okay? It's killing you. Now, maybe we get a little lower price, but we lose all the jobs. Remember that. They never talk about the second part. We're going to create jobs so people can pay. We're going to create good jobs, too, real jobs. We're going to build United States Steel back. We're going to get these coal companies back. They're dying.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. So the clock is ticking on Donald Trump to act on one of his major campaign promises, saving American steel. And with it, all of the steelworker jobs that would be lost if our steel industry's lost. In April of last year, Donald Trump directed Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross to investigate whether or not aluminum and steel imports were jeopardizing our nation's national security, promising to take action if necessary. On May 27th, from his personal Twitter account, Donald Trump tweeted out, "I look forward to reading at Commerce Gov 232 analysis of steel and aluminum to be released in June. We'll take major action if necessary." June passed, no report. July, no report. August, September, October, November, December, all passed, no report. Finally, in January, Wilbur Ross's Commerce Department completed its findings and placed them on Donald Trump's desk for his signature. Now, given the campaign rhetoric in all the Twitter comments, it would have been thought it was a no-brainer. But here we are over a month later and still no signature. Now, under the 1962 Trade Expansion Act, Section 232, our government has the ability to impose a wide variety of barriers, such as tariffs, quotas, things like that, on imports for national security reasons. Section 232 also has a 90-day ticking clock, and that clock started on January 11th. And here to talk about the case and why it's necessary, I've asked Scott Paul to come join us. Scott is the president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing. Scott, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, it's always great to be with you.
So let's get right from the start. Why is this taking so long? This should have been an absolute no-brainer, signed no later than January 12th.
You're right. Even before that, Rick, I mean, the president, when he made the announcement last April, he said that he'd have the relief in place by the end of last June. Clearly, we are, 7-8 months nearly past that date, and the excuses piled up as to why this steel relief wasn't getting done. First, it was they want to repeal health care. Then it was we want to do tax reform and maybe even infrastructure. Finally, they ran into that statutory deadline that you referred to back in January. The report was sent to the president. But it wasn't until a meeting that included Democratic and Republican senators and members of Congress last week, Rick, that the president decided to release the report publicly so that we could all see what the recommendations were. I'll give the president credit. They're pretty strong. They're strong recommendations. And I hope that they're carried out swiftly. I think the challenge has been, because of this delay, we've seen imports surge into our market more than they should have. We've seen steel mills in Pennsylvania, in fact, really close to your home base, lay off workers. Steel mill in Kentucky shut down. And the industry has suffered a lot of damage because of this delay. And I'm also afraid that the process that the president has set up will result in everybody wanting to seek an exemption to this, right? You say, well, it's okay for those guys, but not for my line of products. And so that you'll have this, instead of draining the swamp, you'll have this enormous swamp of special interests, of importers who will be saying, well, not this kind of steel or not this country. So the sooner the better. The president should get this across the finish line. And, I'll give him credit for this. I think he needs to do a lot more once he signs this into law, or puts a signature on it. But he's got to do it, and he's got to do it fast.
Yeah, does he deserve the credit for what's been proposed, or does Wilbur Ross and the Commerce Secretary Department, do they have the credit for saying, hey, we need these things? I don't think he's done anything yet, has he?
No, other than talk about it. You're right. I mean, he's rhetorically, obviously, he said many of the right things, other than about the delay. But the actions themselves, yeah, they've been few and far between, and there's a big gap between what the administration has said it would do on trade and to protect workers and what it's actually done. So I'm hoping that gap will be closed. I'd like to see it closed. But we're pressing the president now to take action, because otherwise, I'm afraid that a lot of the establishment, the importers, the foreign countries will come in and say, you can't do this because it's going to start a trade war. It's going to do this and it's going to do that. And this president seems to be very easily swayed by, lots of who he considers very important people. And so we want to prevent that from happening. We have to understand that at the core of this issue are American workers. They've been screwed. The president has a chance to help put a stop to this with an action like this, but he's got to take it soon.
No, I'm with you. But, the other part of this, you mentioned the waivers. And and as you've said, he's easily swayed, and people who talk nice to him and throw him state dinners, and it just seems to me that he's opening up a direction where the appearance could be that countries like China could easily sway him. Because if you remember on the campaign trail, it was all about China's eating our lunch, and now they're very fine people. It's an interesting change.
Yeah, it has been. Again, there's been a huge divergence between China's cheating. He used stronger language than that to, enjoying the kind of the red carpet treatment that he got in China. He didn't declare China as a currency manipulator. He actually hasn't taken a single action against Chinese policy, trade policy, since he's been in office. He flip-flopped on currency manipulation. There's still a lot of Chinese product coming into our market. The trade deficit with China rose last year to a record $375 billion. And this is a president who said he would put a stop to it. It's time for that rhetoric to match up with the policy. We're not there yet. We're trying to get them there.
No, and this is where the hope is that his supporters and the people around him say, "Hey, look, this is what you promised. Maybe we should be moving in that direction." But I'm not all that hopeful. Now, looking at what Wilbur Ross and the Commerce Secretary, what the Commerce Department proposed, they're talking about a 24% global tariff on steel imports and a 7.7% tariff on aluminum imports. Is that, in your estimation, too high, too low, just right? Where do you see that?
Rick, those are all good questions, and there are, benefits from a couple of the different approaches that the president outlined, both for steel and aluminum. Basically, in a nutshell, it's either a global tariff, as you described, a more targeted tariff towards what I would call the biggest trade offenders, and then a quota on the rest of the world, or simply a pure quota on steel and on aluminum. And so he'll look at those options. I think it's important to understand with respect to steel that, for example, this isn't a NAFTA problem like Mexico, Canada. We don't have a steel trade problem with them. And so I'm not as concerned about trying to ping either Canada or Mexico on steel because there's not look, we can deal with them on NAFTA on a number of issues, but on steel, that's not it. And so there may be something to be said for kind of the middle ground approach on this, which has higher tariffs on a select set of countries who are kind of the worst offenders in terms of imports coming into our market. But, and we just touched on this is a process that will be ripe for abuse and for both these foreign governments and our outsourcers, importers, consuming industries all saying, well, I love steel. I think it's important for our national security, but you can't put a tariff on this product because ABC. And once you start opening up loopholes like that, you decrease the effectiveness of whatever you're trying to do. And if you're trying to keep steel mills open in the United States, keep those workers employed, you need tough action. You need to act decisively. And you can't have a lot of loopholes to make it effective.
I was reading an article just the other day, and it said something on the aluminum producers in this country. We're down to, I guess, a handful now from like more than 20 just a couple of years ago. And when you look at it in, we've lost all of this capacity to manufacture not just steel but aluminum and other things. And you look at the practices of specifically China, which, they target an industry and they go full bore until they take it all over, and then they leave you with nothing. And I think from a national security standpoint, since in this country we don't do anything unless it's national security, if we don't have a steel industry, we don't really have a secure military.
We don't. Just a few weeks ago, I went to Coatesville, Pennsylvania. I know you know exactly where that is, and talked to the steel workers at the mill there that's been making steel since 1810. One of the longest continually operating manufacturing operations in the United States. they're on their last legs. They haven't hired a worker there since 2013. There's been a number of retirements. They have some military business. This is the mill that makes armor plate for things like our battleships, our aircraft carriers, Virginia-class submarines. And there's maybe one other mill like it in the United States. And they're hanging on by a thread. And it's not because they don't make great product. It's not because their workers aren't really efficient, because they are. They do make a great product. Their workers are pretty amazing. But you can't compete against the Chinese government. You can't compete against subsidies like they've been facing from overseas competitors. And if our market is open but no one else's is, we're going to get screwed. And so these guys, Bonnie Long, who's the president of the Steelworkers Local, and everybody else there, they're really looking at this decision. This matters to them. This matters to Coatesville. They want to keep a mill operating that's been there since 1810, that built not only steel for our aircraft carriers, but also those forks that were left in the World Trade Center. There were not a lot of stuff left standing, but those forks were, and they were made in Coatesville. These guys have a lot of pride in the work that they do. And a lot of them listened to President Trump, too, and they said, okay, this guy's going to have our back on steel, but we got to hold him to his promise. It's crunch time. We got to hold him to his promise on this.
No, I'm with you. But what do you say to the person, Scott, who goes, look, we have a global supply chain now. You can't be nationalistic about producing anything and throwing out the old, countries that trade don't go to war and don't fight each other. What do you say to that? That the lowest producing country should be able to make all of the products. Back to Econ 101 and rice and beans.
Right. Interesting theories. The real world works a little differently. Everybody said when China came into the world trading system in 2000 that they would reform economically. They'd become more like us, right? And then they'd also reform politically, and they'd become more democratic. Well, neither of those happened. And in fact, they're farther away from market behaviors than they were, I'd say, 15 or 20 years ago. Their steel industry is way larger than it needs to be. And they have more what's called overcapacity in their steel industry. That is mills they don't need. Than we have production in the United States by a factor of 5 or 6. It's an overwhelming problem. And so they're not more efficient. In fact, they're incredibly inefficient, but it's their government policies that give them a leg up, and they're trade cheating. We've pushed back. We pushed back on specific product lines from specific firms. But this does require a global solution. And Rick, to also answer those critics out there, the United States has a uniquely open market to steel. Almost every other country provides a lot of protection for their steel industry. We have very little. And so as a result, you get all those imports coming into the U.S. market. And at a time when we've had a pretty, okay economy, in manufacturing and steel, it's been lagging behind. And that's because we've seen more imports. In fact, they surged by more than 15% last year on Trump's watch. And we got to put a stop to it. The time for excuses is over. The time for action is now.
Yeah, I mean, this is another one of those instances where, my position on trade is always you produce what you need domestically and you trade for those things that you can't produce. Steel is most certainly something we can and we should be producing and consuming domestically.
Yes, it is. And if it were a question that we can't make it, like we don't know how, we're inefficient, that's another question. And I'm like, in that case, the market has to kind of take over at some point in time. But that's not the case. We have very efficient steel mills. There's been a lot of resources that have been invested in them to make new kinds of steel. Our steel workers are way more productive than steel workers in China and almost every other country. And so it's not a matter of whether or not we can do it. We can do it. We have the know-how. We have a skilled workforce. We know how to do this well. But what we don't have is a government that's looking out for our back. And I just quickly add, Rick, because I think it's really important that even if Trump takes action on this 232, keep in mind it's temporary, that we still need to have better trade deals negotiated. And keep in mind also that we need to do the right things here at home. We need to buy American for our infrastructure. That's absent from Trump's infrastructure plan. We need to invest in our workers in a real way instead of cutting workforce training. And we need to make that a priority. And so this trade action, if it's just off there by itself, is going to mean very little to American workers.
Yeah, I mean, I look at the solar tariffs that they just put on, very short term. I don't even know if it's going to do any good over the short term of it. And I hope that this will be better thought out if and when the president signs it. So last question I've got, what do we do? I mean, there's got to be some pressure we can put in places. There's got to be something that folks can do to push this along. What's the marching order?
Yeah, so we've had an overwhelming amount of support so far that's helped us to get where we are, and we need to give this a final push across the finish line. So we've reached out to our supporters. We've put a lot of petitions into the White House, over 160,000 at this point. That's at AmericanManufacturing.org. We're getting to the point where it's the final days where we're texting now. And we're asking folks to text the word STEEL, S-T-E-E-L, the great kind of steel, to 91990 and get a message directly to the White House and to our elected officials and say this is critically important for our communities, for our workers, for our national security, and it's time to deliver on this.
Good stuff. Scott, I appreciate the time, and we will most certainly continue to follow this until April, and hopefully this gets signed and done and we moved along much quicker. Thanks, Scott.
I'd like to see it, Rick. Thanks, as always, for your advocacy and for your work. Thanks for being a voice for working families.
Thank you, Scott. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Is this the right direction? Should we be saving our steel industry? Basically because it's a national security issue or because we need a steel industry? You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow. I'm Rick Smith, and I'd like to invite you to join with us as we continue to stand up and fight back against an extremely well-funded right-wing machine and their echo chamber by becoming a founding member of our Patreon group. With your membership, you can help keep working-class media strong and stand up for workers' rights, family-centric policy, and equality and justice for all. Just go to patreon.com/Rick Smith Show to join up. Together, we can change the world one show at a time. Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. What a distressing week we've just lived through. I generally stay away from the gun issue because it is one of those really hot button issues. But I look at another school shooting, another loss of life. And, Parkland being one thing, there was another shooting in Ohio. And you look at these one after another becoming more frequent. And to be honest, I'm tired. I'm tired of politicians telling me that, well, we'll keep them in our thoughts and our prayers. Here's the reality. In my experience, never once has thoughts and prayers stopped a bullet. Never once has rhetoric stopped a bullet. What has stopped them is action. I grew up in a housing project on the west side of Cleveland. When I was a kid, if you saw somebody walking around with a gun, they were going to shoot somebody. And I've seen people shot. I've seen people stabbed. I've seen people beaten. And I've always known why. It's always been a heat of the moment thing. It's always been an interpersonal thing. I don't understand a kid walking into a school and shooting the place up. And I can only come back to it is the gun. And I know the gun nuts are saying, but Rick, guns don't kill people. People do. And you go, you're right, but the gun really helps. If someone had a spoon and could kill 100 people in a second, maybe we would talk about banning spoons, but it can't. So stop with the idiotic analogies. Well, you can run people over. You can cut them with knives. Yes, but you cannot kill as efficiently with a knife or a spoon or a car or any of that as you can with one of these semi-automatic assault weapons. And to put this into the hands of anyone who is, and I know, but law-abiding gun owners, they should have the right. Well, here's the thing. The guy in Las Vegas, the kid in Florida, they were law-abiding gun owners until they weren't. At some point, we have to say enough is enough. As I said, I grew up in a place where you saw somebody with a gun, they were going to kill somebody. I now live in an area where I understand the gun culture. You see somebody with a shotgun in the back of their truck, they're probably going to the free gun range. I understand the tradition. I understand that fathers and sons want to go hunting. I understand that you want to go target shooting. I don't understand the need for a semi-automatic, well, almost automatic weapon. I don't get it. They're made for one thing, and that's killing as many people as efficiently as possible. And our lawmakers have got to get off the NRA's dole, and they've got to actually do something to protect our children. And I know. We'll put more armed guards at the schools. We'll put metal detectors. Yeah, you're really going to do that at a time when we can't even get books and desks into the school because we're defunding and privatizing it at every turn? No, how about we save society from these gun lunatics who have fetishized these war weapons? Look, if you want to have a pistol to protect your house, you want to have a shotgun, God bless you. But I'm sorry, a semi-automatic weapon with a high-capacity magazine has no business in the hands of some... I think about those families. A friend of mine, his sister was in one of the schools this past week, a middle school where a kid brought a gun to school and a bunch of ammunition and what they're calling a distractive device. Fortunately, somehow the kid either shot himself on purpose or on accident in the bathroom before he could cause mayhem. But in talking with him, the trauma that he and his family are going through. You listen to the victims, these kids from the Parkland school. You listen to their stories and the trauma. You know, most of us, we just see it on TV. It doesn't touch the majority of our lives. But I look at these kids and I look at their families and I say we should listen to them. But instead, what the right wing has done in their spin machine, in the gun cult, what they have done is they've turned to attacking these kids, accusing them of being crisis actors or saying that it didn't even happen at all. It was a staged left-wing conspiracy. How deprived do you have to be? How mentally ill do you have to be? And look, we have the son of the President of the United States retweeting some of this stuff. What's it going to take? I now say absolutely, unequivocally, without question, we need to have an assault weapons ban. We need to immediately ban AR-15s. We need to immediately ban high-capacity magazines, bump stocks, and all of this stuff. You know, I go back to, when I was a kid, we didn't have access to that stuff. So if someone got shot, someone got shot. It wasn't half the neighborhood. And my other question, why aren't people going to jail who are giving these people guns? I look at that 7th grader in Ohio. Whose gun was it? Why don't we hold them accountable? Our gun laws are just insane. And at the end of the day, we had better find some sanity. And I'll tell you, I am hopeful like I've never been watching these kids in Florida come together and organize. As I said last week, you're looking at the beginning of the next greatest generation because they're not going to let this go by. They're not going to put up with, oh, we'll keep you in our thoughts and our prayers. They're going to demand action, and we need to help them. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Gun nuts, bring it on. Give me your justifications. Rick Smith @thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much. We'll see you back here next week. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1939. That was the day striking auto workers in Cleveland, Ohio, defended their picket lines in what is known as the Battle of East 140th Street. Members of UAW Local 45 at GM's Fisher Body Plant had been on strike for 3 weeks. They had joined striking GM workers at 12 plants throughout Michigan. They demanded a supplemental agreement granting skilled workers wage increases, overtime adjustments and seniority, and apprentice provisions. In Cleveland, strikers vowed to stop the scabbing and were mostly successful. Now, at the start of the morning shift, a scab attempted to plow through the picket lines at a high rate of speed. Strikers flooded the gates and brought the scab car to a virtual stop. As they attempted to convince him not to cross through, mounted police viciously charged and attacked the strikers. Police continued to shoot tear gas guns from behind plant gates. Soon, there were more than 5,000 picketers fighting with police as workers poured out from half a dozen nearby plants to support the strikers. For over 2 hours, workers showered strike-breaking forces with bricks, rocks, and paving blocks. They overturned scab cars and drove the police off the street and into the plant. Fighting broke out again in the afternoon when police tried to bring in more tear gas supplies. Strike leaders directed activities from an amplifier on the roof of a nearby restaurant. The next day, famed Prohibition crusader Elliot Ness, now Cleveland's director of public safety, enforced a 500-yard riot zone, banning all gatherings near the gates and limited picketers to 7 at each gate. Strikers began picketing the homes of known scabs and would ratify a new contract just days later. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com. You are listening to the best of The Rick Smith Show. If you have any thoughts, any questions, any comments, we'd love to hear it. You can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. Thanks for tuning in. And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is The Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for tuning in. This hour, we're going to spend a little time enjoying the week that was. And what a week it was indeed. The first State of the Union address. And I got to be honest with you, right from the start, I fell asleep watching it. There was no energy. There was no... in fact, I looked at it, and as I was watching, it looked to me that he didn't even understand where to break for applause or where the punchlines were half the time. Now, this is a guy who railed on Obama for years about using a teleprompter. So I found his speech to be very interesting, and I'm sure insomniacs the world over were thrilled to have something to fall asleep to. Now, for me, there was a bunch of stuff that I would have liked to have seen in that speech. One, I would have liked to have seen him say, we're going to protect steel. We're going to save the steel industry because, hey, I ran on it. And we're going to move on the 232 case to make sure that American-made steel doesn't go the way of the dinosaurs. Seemed like a good start. I didn't see him talk a lot about manufacturing and how, plans to bring jobs back. A little bit about vocational school stuff, but how? Didn't see much of that. Made lip service to infrastructure. And again, the infrastructure plans, always very interesting to me. Because understand, we just did a major tax bill, a major tax handout. Call it a heist, call it a scheme, call it robbery, call it whatever you want. But we just gave away about $1.7 trillion over the next decade. That's money that could have easily gone to do, you know what? Rebuild our roads and bridges. Yet what we get out of Donald Trump and what we're getting out of the Republicans is this scheme, is another scam, is another way of going, hey, there's a fairy out there that is going to sprinkle dust on us and going to rebuild our infrastructure. Understand, the only way our infrastructure gets rebuilt is if we rebuild it. These schemes, these scams, these magic plans that we're going to put, I get $200 billion up and somehow that's going to become $1 trillion. I'm sorry, I'm not really getting that. Unless we're going to put toll booths on every corner, unless we're going to pay huge amounts of rent down the road that we, the taxpayers, eventually pay for anyway. And this is the kind of dishonest stuff that people hate about our politics. We need to rebuild our infrastructure. We're about $4.6 trillion in the hole, according to the American Society of Civil Engineers. About $4.6 trillion. And yet we're talking about $200 million and then hope that Wall Street's going to come along. I'll be honest with you. Every scam that they've come up with, every scheme that they've come up with, it seems to be all about Wall Street. It's all about Wall Street, and it's all about sticking it to not just the taxpayers, but to the working people. I saw nothing in his speech that said to me he cared about the middle class, that he cared about a prosperous working class. I didn't see it. I saw some words about unity. I saw lots of division. I saw some words about, this is kind of an idea, but to be honest, they're not his words. They're not his ideas. So how long is it going to take before he forgets it? And we're back at this division point, still not moving forward on our infrastructure, not moving forward on sane trade policies, not moving forward on a lot of things. We're just stuck, what seems like in neutral and in chaos. And the reality is it's always the working people who get the shaft. Across the nation and in my home state of Pennsylvania, there's been a calculated, constant, and extremely well-funded attack on unionized workers and the standard of living of all workers. If politicians and right-wing think tanks aren't attacking the right to organize collectively and bargain for better wages, hours, and conditions, they're attacking unemployment insurance, workers' compensation, and prevailing wage laws. These attacks are never, understand, they are never for the benefit of workers. They're not for the benefit of families, not for the benefit of communities, or even taxpayers, as they're often framed, but simply and solely the benefit of corporations and shareholders. There's a new study released by the Midwest Economic Policy Institute that looks at the effects of Indiana repealing its prevailing wage or common construction wage law. And to be honest, it reinforces, I think, everything that we already know. It's more for the wealthy and less for the workers. And here to talk about this latest study is Frank Manzo. Frank is the policy director at the Illinois Economic Policy Institute. Frank, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me, Rick.
So, before we get into the meat of your study, which, lots of interesting findings, and I would argue not all that surprising, before we get into it, I think it's important to explain exactly what prevailing wage laws are, maybe discuss a little bit why they're important to local communities. So let's start with Indiana. What was the common construction wage law there in Indiana? How was it calculated, and what did it cover?
Yeah, sure, Rick. And prevailing wage is a law that supports blue-collar construction workers on public construction projects, and that's true across the country. In Indiana, it is essentially a minimum wage for projects supported by Hoosier taxpayers. In Indiana, the rates were determined by the most common construction wage. That's why it's called was called the Common Construction Wage Act. And so what that means is the modal rate. So the rate that's most paid to the most construction workers in a county, that's the rate that must be paid to workers as long as they can do the job, they have the same skill set, and they can perform the same job duties with the same equipment as everybody else. So everyone must have been paid the same prevailing wage and benefits rates as long as they could do the work, and that's true regardless of demographic